Good morning, everybody. It is wonderful to see familiar faces, friends, and new faces, people I don't know. I'm Rebecca Winthrop. I'm the director of the Center for Universal Education here at Brookings. It's a total pleasure to welcome you to this symposium on education system transformation for and through inclusion. And a huge warm welcome also to our online audience. We have many, many people joining us online. So thank you and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the folks online. Please do participate and share questions and comments through social media. We have hashtag transform4, the number 4, inclusion. So please do join in there, and we'll be taking online questions and comments throughout the day. It's my great pleasure to open this, and on behalf of our partners, the Special Olympics International and the Global Partnership for Education, warm welcome. We are here to discuss an incredibly important question, which is, what would it take to transform education systems to be truly inclusive for learners with disabilities? This is a question that has not gotten enough attention over the years in the global education community. It is a question we are diving into more here at the Center for Universal Education, and we consider ourselves on a learning journey with all of you. For those of you who don't know our work at the Center for Universal Education at Brookings, we are very focused on transforming systems to ensure that they meet the goals of, or all children can have lifelong learning opportunities and meet SDG 4, the UN Sustainable Development Goal 4. We are all very far away from that goal. We have 6 more years. And there is absolutely no way we can meet SDG 4 without taking inclusion seriously. And we at CUE work with about 200 partners around the world, be they governments, civil society organizations, teacher organizations, private sector organizations, youth groups, parent groups, the whole, you name it, to really think about what it takes to transform systems towards the SDGs and holistic outcomes. And one of the things that we have certainly learned is that transforming systems is different from strengthening systems. Strengthening systems usually tackles the visible elements of systems and changing them. It's important work, whether that's changing budgets or changing HR recruitment policies, et cetera. But transforming systems really gets into mindsets and sort of those invisible elements that guide how we think about what people's potential is, what education should look like, what the purpose of education is. So this is deep work. We are excited today to kick off. The program today is a opening session that will be live streamed, and then to kick off, it kicks off a number of interactive workshops during the day, and then we will come back online at 3:30 Eastern Time, for a final wrap-up session, and we're very, very honored to have distinguished guests joining us. Thank you to the ministers and their delegations from Malawi, Seychelles, Paraguay, and from U.S. state of Minnesota. They are joining us for the whole day. They're doing incredible work. Please find them. We're very grateful for your participation and your time and for sharing. And finally, some housekeeping. I got my little name tag taken away because it didn't look good, but yes, Kelsey, who has been behind the scenes, she has you see the bright yellow on the name tag for those of you joining us in person. That means the bright yellow name tag means you're part of the Center for Universal Education. If you're lost, confused, want to know where the bathrooms are, need a pen, whatever, please ask the team and they will help you. And last but not least, my final goal here is to give a huge thanks to everyone who's been preparing this event. There's far too many people to name from the Center for Universal Education, Special Olympics, and GPE who have been working deeply behind the scenes to put this all on for you. But I wanted to give a shout out to 3 women who started having a conversation almost a year ago, Jennifer O'Donoghue, Emily Morris, and Jackie Jodel, about this idea. And without them, this would not happen. So a huge thank you to those three. And without further ado, I am very, very pleased to introduce Nyasha Darrera. He is the Sargent Shriver Global Messenger of Special Olympics. I want to invite him to the stage. He hails from Zimbabwe. He is a superstar athlete. He has won more medals than I can count. He's an incredible runner. He is an incredible champion. He says his goal is to bring voice to the voiceless. He has an incredible story, and if anybody is ever lucky enough to grab him and take him out for coffee to not only hear his story, but hear his ideas about what needs to change, hot chocolate is his favorite drink. And Nyasha, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Brookings. Thank you so much, all the delegates, honorables, amazing individuals in this room. Well, as you heard, my name is Nyasha Darrera, and I'm a Special Olympics athlete hailing from Zimbabwe. Without Special Olympics, I wouldn't be here. And thank you, Special Olympics, for sacrificing your resources to help people with IDD like me. If not Special Olympics, I wouldn't be here standing in this wonderful room full of global leaders. I'm a child born in Zimbabwe from a remote area. I didn't know one day I'll fly, I'll be in a plane. But through Special Olympics, it's a miracle for me. Today, I want to tell you my story of how I involved in Special Olympics, and my growth has been tremendous in that I was able to develop unstoppable, irresistible self-confidence. Apart from that, sport has really helped me to discover that I'm a great athlete. Before Special Olympics came to my school, I was bullied, I was stereotyped, I was told, young men, you are nothing, you cannot do anything, you cannot amount to do anything. But Special Olympics, to cut the story short, I hold almost 19 gold medals, 6 silver medals. Not just medals, but as you can see, confidence-wise, Special Olympics has actually given its resources to develop an athlete leader who is confident, who is able to speak before millions. This is a true testament that Special Olympics is a life-changing movement. As you can see, I've managed to speak before global leaders. I've managed to share challenges that my fellow athletes are facing on each and every day life. As myself, I was told that I'm nothing, and there are so many fellow athletes outside there who are into schools, who are still facing bullying, who are still facing stereotypes, and it's not an easy journey for them. And still like today, I'm still facing that, but Special Olympics has changed the scope of it. And I was at a school whereby we had our own class as a special needs students, and we were not allowed to get involved with other mainstreaming students. It was a challenge at that school. And we have so many times we have saying we want to create inclusive schools. We want to create inclusive schools in words, but not in action. So I believe that each and every delegate in this room will hear our concerns as people with IDD globally, that we need to be accommodated in all spheres of life, not just in the sport, not just in the classroom, but in all spheres, being at workplace and also having things that will enable us to thrive in. As you can see, our disabilities is not oftentimes seen with the naked eye, but it's a hidden disability that needs also to be included in all spheres of life. I'm at a stage whereby I finished school, but I'm looking forward to be employed. I need to raise a family. So just consider that. And also, I've got a question that I want to pose in this room. How do you feel when you are isolated, when you are rejected, when you say, how do you feel? You feel out of place, right? And remember, no one applied to be born what he is or she is today. And we need to accept each other as we are. Did you apply to be born a lady or a woman? No. So let's choose to include. And I tell you, with this global education transformation, will go a long way in changing so many lives of people with IDD and without, because the inclusion is a revolution. With this said and done, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the people who are making a difference worldwide in terms of inclusive education. And I will actually say, why wait? Education cannot wait. Allow me to introduce Yasmin Sharif and our great advocate, Timo Shriver, who are making a difference worldwide. Thank you, Yasmin and Tim Shriver, for joining us on this wonderful, amazing event. As you know, despite extensive global policy conversation about the need to meet United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, supporting more equitable education, no nation has come close to achieving truly inclusive classrooms and schools community at scale. Nearly every education system has fallen short in their efforts to develop settings of full social inclusion, which requires going beyond physical inclusion to create accessible and meaningful learning opportunities for all, including children with intellectual and developmental disability. Given your extensive work in this area, how would you answer the question? I'll also give an opportunity to you, Yasmin, about the question, what would you take it to transform education systems to be truly inclusive for learners with disabilities?
Thank you very much. Before I start responding to your question, there's a one time, right? Because I have my talking points here. So are you guys asking me one question? I will go through this quickly right now, yeah? First of all, I would like to thank the Brookings Institute, my friends, for having me. I would like to thank GPE and other parts of my friends for also being part of hosting this and inviting me, and the Special Olympics International, Tim Shriver, and all of you. And all of you are here. It's really a blessing. When it comes to learners with disabilities, I assume that all of you know about Education Cannot Wait as a global fund in the UN system, pooled funding. We only operate in situations of armed conflicts, protracted conflicts, emergencies, climate-induced disasters, and refugees. So we are speaking about kids left furthest behind, and then on top of it, having disabilities, whether they are intellectual disabilities or physical disabilities. So this is like those left furthest behind, who we want to put furthest or up front and be in the lead, like you were winning all your medals. I want to start with an anecdote why it's so important to provide a quality education to children with disabilities. And I'll give an example of an intellectual disability, and I will give you a very personal example. So I have a nephew who was born autistic, okay? I'm half Swedish, half Egyptian. He lives in Sweden, grew up in Sweden. He comes on holiday to visit his auntie. And we drive around and walk around Manhattan, and I'm going to sightsee his mom and his siblings and my autistic nephew. And so I point and I say, Look here, Philip. Look, this is the Empire State Building. No, that's the Chrysler Building. He was able to do that because he got very good education for children with disabilities in Sweden. And he was faster than me, and he knew more than I did. And I live in that city. So I just want to show you the potential if you provide a proper quality education. There's so much intelligence there. And I also want us not to forget children who are physically disabled. And we see a lot of that when we work in conflict countries. My first mission was to Afghanistan in 1990 after the Soviets had pulled out. And they left behind, Afghanistan is probably the most mined country on earth. I don't know how many children I met who have lost limbs and legs and arms as a result of stepping on the mine. I remember a boy called Sedikula, and I met him at the ICRC hospital. I mean, his legs were gone, half of his arms were gone, and he was just trying to chase the flies away. He had a little bit of his arm left. And he smiled, very beautiful smile, Afghan young boy. I said, Sedikula, what makes you smile? He said, because God saved my life. I said, what happened? I was playing under a tree, and a mine blew up, but the donkey was the one stepping on the mine, and the donkey died, and I survived. I mean, talk about being powerful and resilient. Talk about putting life in perspective. And the same goes for Ukraine, where you see more and more children who are losing their arms and legs. We see it in Gaza. UNICEF has reported that 12,000 children have lost either an arm or a leg. So, there are children, and in many countries where we go, children who are intellectually disabled, for instance, we have found children being chained up in the house. So we come to see a school, they're not there, we go to the village, we ask about them, and they are chained or hidden in a room. So talk about being left furthest behind. And therefore, I want to turn to the international community and UN member states, because they have failed short of implementing the commitment under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, and the SDGs, and of course many other international commitments. So yes, they talk nicely about it, but we know that you've got to walk the talk. It's not enough. I'm so tired of talking, and I'm so tired of going to conferences. I like being with you because I know you're doers, but you have to be a doer. And we can have the best policies. I'm a lawyer, human rights lawyer by training, but I've come to the point, yes, you have the laws, you have the policy in place, but if you don't act on it, the laws mean this much. The policies mean this much. You have to act. And in order to act, you need financial resources. Everything costs money. And education and inclusiveness for children with disabilities require a massive amount of financial resources, and they exist. They exist. We live in a universe of abundance. I mean, let's be honest. Worldwide, the UN spokesperson, the US spokesperson recently said, we spend 2.1 trillion on war. How much do we spend on children with disabilities? I mean, this goes to the whole world, 193 member states. So I just want to mention how we put our priorities. So also, it's all great to have a vision. Yeah, we're going to change the world. We're going to make sure that all children with disabilities can go to school and get the proper education. But a vision, and we fail so often when it comes to vision. You put a vision here, but a vision it's like taking steps every day. Small decisions, big decisions. And if you decide out of fear or out of greed, I'm not going to take that decision, I'm going to go this way instead. And the next day you take another decision that brings you there, you're never going to reach that vision. But if everything is logically, every decision, small or big, builds upon that, and financial resources is a huge part of those decision making, builds upon it, training teachers, building schools, facilities for children with disabilities, specialized programs like my nephew, and so forth. Eventually, before you know it, you reach the vision. But it has to be logical, following every little decision. So that's very important. And I think that education cannot wait, and the Special Olympics, with which whom we have we have the privilege to partner. We are going to partner. We're going to start off with a small pilot. Yes. We're gonna start off with a small pilot project. If that is successful, we're going to scale up with more and more. We are coming in with the financial resources because they have the brains, they are doing the action, they have everything that we don't know, don't understand. But we are a fund, so we have the funding. But if that is successful, which I am 100% sure it will be, we are going to scale up and continue our advocacy and remind the world that every child with intellectual or physical disabilities have an inherent right to high quality programming. And the Special Olympics International have put for every government to allocate 3% of the government resources. And I think that's a modest minimum. If you can't meet that, I think you shouldn't even be leading. You know, you don't understand where the priorities are. At ECW, we have put our target at 10% for beneficiaries and 5% of financing. But we will be by your side and fight for those percentages to go up. So that's very important. And we want to see national governments to put 10% of the resources towards educational programming for an inclusion for children with disabilities. Let me conclude with 3 quotes by 3 great personalities in our history who had disabilities. Let me start with Stephen Hawking, who had ALS. And he said, intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. We all know that. But he also said, when you are in a challenging situation, and he obviously was, as we know, don't look down at your feet. Look up at the stars and understand the universe and why you are here. That's powerful thinking. Powerful thinking. He would never have thought those thoughts had he not been where he was. That is always what comes out of being disadvantaged when you have a chance to actually work on that resilience. Another one is Helen Keller. She said, the best and the most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or touched, but can be felt with the heart. Now, anyone with a big heart will feel for the children to such an extent that they will want to just shower them with financial resources, expertise, trained teachers, tools, so that they know the difference between the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building, and go out and find the stars and the moons and new discoveries in science. Which brings me to my last absolute favorite, Ludwig van Beethoven, the great classical composer. He was stone deaf when he wrote the 9th Symphony. And he was very deaf when he wrote the 7th and the 8th. And he said, from one heart to another heart. And that's our message to all governments. Focus on this, and you know how to read and govern and rule and where to put your money on children with disabilities, because they are the geniuses of this time. Thank you.
Wow.
What more can we say, ladies and gentlemen?
Call it a wrap.
Thank you. And also, given your extensive work in this area, how would you answer the question, Tim?
Okay. Well, first of all, I answer the question, I'm really done for the day. I'm at Brookings at a sellout event hosted by Rebecca and her extraordinary team, which is already pinch yourself for all of us in Special Olympics to be here. So thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to the Brookings team. We have people from all over the world who have come here, from Paraguay, from the Seychelles, from Malawi, from Kazakhstan, people who represent international organizations. Also, as far as I'm concerned, mission accomplished. And then I have Yasmin saying she's made the commitment. It's on tape. Jonathan, you have that? You recorded it? Cannot be denied any longer. What if I could ask the sign language expert, what is the symbol for giving money? I was trying to watch it. What is the symbol? How do you?
I will defer to the real signing expert.
Okay, so here's the symbol for the day. Can we all stand and practice?
Yeah.
Let's stand and practice.
And we're taking a picture of that, circulating all over the world.
Can you show us what? Like this? Is that right? Yeah, from your pockets out. So Yasmin, you do it to me.
Yeah! Like this.
No, I'm receiving.
Yeah!
Oh, yeah.
Yeah!
So, but seriously, it is actually, you know, for those of you, for all of us in Washington or whether we come from other countries, this building is known as one of the leading, if not the leading think tank in the world. One of the great centers for the creation, for the study, for the implementation of public policy and public ideas in the world. And it's thought of as a think tank. And Yasmin has already referred to this idea that we are here at the center of the most advanced and most influential think tank in the world. Don't underestimate it. But if I can be so bold as to say today we're converting it into an action tank. This is not primarily a day for the discussion of ideas. And the reason for that is not that ideas are not important, but the reason is that places like Brookings, places like Education Cannot Wait, places like the GPE, even us at Special Olympics, we have advanced the ideas to the point where we know what to do. That doesn't mean we've evaluated everything. That doesn't mean we know all the answers. It just means we know enough to act. And so today is this great connection between thought and action that we're being invited to. The third reason I'd be done for the day is to just hear the introduction from Yasha. As is often the case, I write down his words. He has unstoppable, irresistible self-confidence.
Ooh, wow.
Did anybody else hear that? How many people have unstoppable, irresistible self-confidence? Put your hand up. Yeah, Yasmin has it.
Everybody!
I'm sandwiched between two unstoppable, irresistible self-confidence.
As if you were not.
But it's worth noting that results are not unattainable. Sometimes we hear these discussions of the enormity of the challenge, of war, of conflict, of disabling conditions, of stigma, of bias, of the absence of action, of the absence of constituencies, of the absence of funders. And we think to ourselves, oh my God. And it's kind of as though you get to the point where you get defeated by the enormity of the challenge. I just hope we noticed this morning that we were given an incentive to recognize that the challenge is reachable. You have an example. I'm not making it up. I don't have to send a video crew to Zimbabwe. We don't have to do a study of parents in a remote part of Minnesota. We have an example right here of a young man who was bullied, who was mocked, who was humiliated, who has spent the better part of his life economically insecure, who is standing up here with unstoppable self-confidence. So we know what to do, guys. We know what to do, gang. And we know it's achievable. We know children with intellectual and developmental challenges can achieve. We know they can contribute to their families. We know they can make a difference in their communities. We know they can serve in Lions clubs and in their faith-based institutions. We know they can work at jobs. We don't need to wonder about, is it possible? We don't need to be defeated by the enormity of the challenge. We just need to act. We know we raise GDP when we are more inclusive. We know children without disabilities learn better when we're inclusive. We know graduation rates go up. We know test scores go up for all children when they are in inclusive environments. We know parents avoid poverty when their children are included. I mean, a lot of this we know. So my first answer is not all my talking points, but is this central one. Results are achievable if we commit to action and if we commit to resources. But results are not achievable if we perseverate on identifying the extent of the problem, the policy discussions necessary to create senses of common this, that, or the other thing about the problem, and then go to large-scale conferences time after time and capital after capital where people like me in suits convene to talk about how big the problem is. That's a sure recipe for bullied children, for excluded children, for humiliated parents, and for underdeveloped communities and human beings.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Powerful.
This is amazing. And as you know, today's symposium highlights the relationship between inclusive practice and system change in education, recognizing that true inclusion cannot be an add-on, but will require fundamental rebuilding of education systems and structures. Research has shown that the first step in this type of transformation is building a clear and shared sense of purpose among actors across education ecosystems. Yasmin and Tim, both of you are widely recognized as passionate advocates for inclusion within education, and you both share an impatience when it comes to this topic. Despite your tireless efforts, the pace of change often feels slow. Can you share your frustrations with us on this topic? What would you promote the development of shared purpose for inclusion in education systems around the world? I'll start with you, Tim.
Thank you, Nasha. Look, I think we have to recognize that the pace of change has not been slow, but completely unacceptable. And you say, okay, let's find out who to blame. Okay, everybody hold up a mirror. Because if we all think that we're going to be blaming somebody else, let's go to the World Bank. They're the problem. We can go down and all march right here, right to the World Bank where the meetings are going on. The IMF is the problem. The UN is the problem. USAID is the problem. DFID is the problem. You name it. The ministries of education are the problem. We have to be better, gang. We have to be better. Here's the step we've committed to taking ourselves at Special Olympics. We are going to publish an annual report on this issue. Not to force, people to get humiliated, but to highlight people that are getting things done. I want to be writing at the end of this year, together with all of you, about Paraguay and their example, so that their peers in Latin America will look and go, how the heck did Paraguay get all that attention? And I want to be writing about Malawi. People say, well, Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world. I want to be writing about how Malawi is making progress, how they're hitting benchmarks, how they're moving forward, how they're marshaling resources, how they're building private sector and public sector engagement. And I want other countries to be embarrassed. I'm sorry to say, it's time we highlighted people who do well in order to prove to people who are doing nothing that doing nothing is unacceptable. So I think there needs to be, in Special Olympics, a great New York Times writer wrote years and years ago, Special Olympics is an organization that is all carrot and no stick. Okay, all carrot and a little bit of stick coming on. Just a little bit. We're not an organization about shaming people. And we're not an organization about humiliating people for where they are. But we are going to increasingly be an organization that is demanding that people be held accountable to their own performance. And in that work, I think we might be able to create a little more momentum than being all carrot and no stick has created so far.
Wow, amazing.
I love that. ECW is on. I really like that. I think it's important. You don't need to shame somebody. They will shame themselves by seeing success elsewhere. They will see what brilliance looks like. So I fully agree with the whole philosophy of that. So you have ECW all behind you. We are going to do everything we can in our power to make sure that we play a role in that. Together with you. And I just, some words by Alice Walker came to my mind, and it is, we are the change that we've been waiting for. This is so important. I agree with you. It is everyone else's fault except ours. However, we have to set the example. We have to be the models. So I have nothing else to add. So I think you said it so much better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. A systems framework also highlights the need to bring all the components of an education system, from curriculum pedagogue, and teacher professional. Learning to infrastructure, financing and data and assessment system into alignment around this shared purpose. Where do you see the greatest need for change within education systems in terms of aligning systems from around inclusive education? Where do you feel the greatest resistance to change? And what have been facilitators of change?
I'll just go very briefly and then let Yasmin take the time. And I know we're running short on time. We believe that the central impediment to the implementation of effective inclusive education is the capability of a trained teacher workforce. Yeah. You cannot ask teachers to be includers in their schools or to manage children with complex learning needs without training. And there are country after country that has not invested in training teachers who can be includers and special educators. You can't get there without a trained workforce. Training is somewhat expensive, but not overwhelmingly expensive. Training coaches, for instance, in our work, in coaches who can be includers in physical activity, in play, which is so important, especially in early childhood, is not expensive. But you can't do it without a trained workforce. Number two, we can't do it without listening to young people. This is not a change that will be primarily, in my view, led by adults. As I often say, if you want to see a 12-year-old with Down syndrome, and you want that 12-year-old to be included in the lunchroom, there is only one person who can make that 12-year-old feel included in the lunchroom, and that's another 12-year-old. And there's only one person who can change the attitude of a 12-year-old who does not have a disability, and that's a 12-year-old with Down syndrome. All the talk from me and Yasmin and even Yasha, it's not going to work. You need 12-year-olds. You need 8-year-olds. You need 14-year-olds. And they're ready. This is the world, honestly, gang, this is the world kids want to live in. They know it. They're confused by why there's so much segmentation, so much hierarchical, so much sorting, so much name calling, so much classification and labeling. Why are they being raised in a world that they're pigeonholed so much? They don't like it. They don't know enough. They don't have the language to end it. But if you give them the language, they will do it. So number two for us is giving young people the power to become agents of change. And number three is having good metrics and evaluation that we hold ourselves accountable for progress. These are pillars that can be implemented in almost any school at any time, in any country, in any county. Train teachers, empower young people, measure progress. You get a systems change, in our view.
Well, amazing. Over to you, Yasmin.
Well, again, he's already said it. No, but I don't want to repeat because I agree with everything that you have said. I think one important aspect is not to have small trying to fill the whole examples of, we helped 5 kids there or 2 there. It has to be a system change. The whole system has to change for every child. I think there has to be a proactiveness to find the children, at least from a visit. When we work in conflict and climate disasters and refugee camps, we have to actually go and look for them because no one is going to bring them to us. So I think you have to proactively take affirmative action, and you have to systematize it. So that's very important. I think the teachers, as you said, play an instrumental role because they are the big adult in the room that can immediately recognize stigmatization and all the sensitivities and bring the 2-year-olds together. I mean, the teacher has a very important caregiver role besides also teaching. So I think that's very important. And then again, I keep coming back to that, but I represent the Global Fund. In order to get all of this going, we need finances, we need money. And I just want to give an example for OECD DAC countries. And this is for any child. We spend about $11,000 a year for a child to go to school, right? That is $10,000 to $11,000. For us, when we operate in countries of conflict and climate change and refugees, we're moving around with about $150 to $200. That's not okay. That's not okay. And I still believe there's more than enough for everybody to make it, have it, and thrive and do well. It's just, we can move around a little bit the distribution and make the focus on children with intellectual and physical disabilities so that we can get more geniuses into the world.
Wow, thank you so much. Can we give a round of applause for our amazing panelists? Well, because of our time, we're supposed to open a question for the whole group, but we ask for final reflection from our panelists. And Yasmin and Tim, what questions or reflection would like to participants in person or our audience online to hold in mind throughout today's symposium?
You can start.
No, you go ahead.
I will only say 2 words that my dear Deputy Graham Lang always tells me. He doesn't need to tell me that, but he does. Be unapologetically impatient. We cannot wait a second or a minute. It's now, now, now. And go out with all the passion, the energy, the sense of cause and mission that you have. Because when you see the results, you know why you came to this world. You feel a sense of purpose that it just transcends anything else in life. So yeah, be unapologetically impatient and just unleash your passion.
Yeah, well, I think, amen, yes. I think the question, I have just a 2-part question. Sorry for bending the rules a little, Nyasha. The first part is, how do we do this better? Even though I've said we own responsibility, that's own responsibility that the ways we've tried to advocate for fuller inclusion haven't yet worked. So we have to ask each other the question, what else can we do? And I want to invite people to ask that question of each other. What haven't we done? How do we tell the story? How do we advocate? How do we lobby? How do we knock on doors? How do we capture the videotape and who do we send it to? How do we, so I think the question has to be in part, since we haven't gotten where we want to go, what do we need to change? That's question 1. And then question 2, I think, is, let's get a button that says, have you given your 3%? I mean, if it takes something as little as 3%, if we can go to country after country, and many countries exceed this, God bless them. But if we can go to country after country and say, have you committed a minimum of a prorated amount of your education budget to the inclusion and education of children with intellectual disabilities? It's roughly 3% of the population. Some places a little lower, some places estimate higher. If you haven't done the minimum, dollar for these kids, what's stopping you? I think we should ask that question and demand a minimum threshold, a basement flooring, whatever the right word is, a floor of a 3% commitment from every country in the world, bar none.
Wow. Otherwise, we'll shame them.
Or we'll
have these big posters.
We'll smilingly shame them.
Wow, incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up our, it's like ideas without action are worthless.
Yeah.
And we need to do more action and less talking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round as Tim and Yasmin leave the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Huh?
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will provide a look into the research on inclusive education and education system transformation, providing a look at what we know and what we should know about the system's impact of inclusive practices, and vice versa. I'm excited to welcome to the stage Dr. Christopher Johnston. Dr. Christopher Johnston is an assistant professor of comparative and international development education. In his research, he explores operationalization and inclusiveness as they relate to both international development education and campus internationalization. He has worked on education or development-related projects on every continent except Antarctica, but has primarily focused his research in sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
All right, I think I might need a slight bit of tech assistance here to get these slides up. Is that correct? Are we broadcasting them for the audience? CUE folks? Is that right?
Let me go see.
Okay, great.
Yellow.
If not, we'll just go ahead. While we're waiting, let me give a huge thank you to the Center for Universal Education, no problem, the Global Center for Inclusive Education, GPE, for sponsoring today's conversation. It's really a great honor to be with all of you in the room today and share space with you. This particular moment is I have about, I would say, 10 minutes to walk you through education systems transformation for and through inclusive education, so buckle up. It's going to be a fast ride. We don't have a lot of time, but we'll do it. And I want to just quickly introduce my colleagues who are my thought partners on this, Jackie Jodl and, oh, there we go, great, Jackie Jodl and Jennifer O'Donohue. Thank you all. Audience, please, if there's any complaints or problems with this talk, I want you to go to Jackie and Jennifer. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about this, inclusive education systems transformation. It all starts with asking some questions. What's the purpose of education? Why focus on inclusion as a mechanism for systems transformation? And then, of course, the question that our previous speakers brought up, how do we go about doing this as a community of people who care about this and who are interested in pushing these agendas forward? So let me start with the definition. The definition we're using for, this is the precursor to a paper that's going to be coming out a little bit later in the summer or early fall. Our definition of inclusive education, we borrow from Mel Enskow, who said it's a continual process of identifying and removing barriers to students' presence, participation, and achievement. I want to highlight two pieces of this definition for you all. Continual process and removing barriers. Those things are going to keep coming up again and again throughout today's presentation. And why inclusive education? I don't think I need to convince anybody in this room, but it is, you know, the world has agreed that we have these sustainable development goals that are going to push our collective development. And Sustainable Development Goal number 4 specifically says equitable and inclusive education. The most important word, I think, in this definition and to the why of inclusive education is so that all children can thrive. It's not just about participation, it's not just about being there, but it's about systems that create individuals who then can contribute to the greater good of the world once we all have gone and passed through. And why now? I think again, everybody in this room understands the urgency of why inclusive education is important. Children with various identities are not finding their way into schools in the first place. And when they do, they're not finding their way effectively out of schools. And so inclusive education presents an opportunity to try to do things differently. So how do we get there? How do we get to this place of inclusive education for systems transformation and inclusive education for through systems transformation? Well, again, it takes a constant engagement with these questions. What is education all about? Why is inclusion the preferred mechanism for that? What is that inclusion anyway? And why is it important? Why is it important to people who are in the system? And why is it important to the system itself? And so I'll take a pause for a minute to talk about what systems are. Systems are ecosystems. They have all of these interoperable parts, and systems themselves interoperate with other systems. So you think about education systems and health systems, systems of economics, et cetera. All of these interoperate with one another. But within the system of education, there are many pieces that sort of take place at various levels, from national to international to local. These can be policies, these can be laws, these can be procedures. They might be practices, they might be pedagogies that take place in the classroom, but they're also mindsets and norms and values. And a lot of times these are culturally driven, and unfortunately sometimes these are imported from other places, oftentimes without question. So these exist at multiple levels, they interact with one another, and also unfortunately exclusion. At the current state of practice is part of all of these systems. So now comes to the, I guess, the crux of the talk. Education for inclusive education for systems transformation, and inclusive education through systems transformation. And there's a slight distinction. And I'm not going to play favorites here, but I want to make sure that we're clear on what both of these things are, because I think in many ways they're both very important. So education systems for inclusive education, systems transformation for inclusive education, this comes from a lot of the great work of CUE. And it's all about aligning people, aligning resources, aligning commitments. It's about rebuilding systems for shared purposes, about engaging the whole ecosystem to build coherence around what its possibilities are, aligning all the components and incorporating both the hard and the soft elements of that. Hard elements being policies, laws, finances, soft elements being the way people think about things, the way people conceptualize education, the way that we act with one another and make commitments. And then the second idea is education through inclusive education. And this one takes a slightly more critical stance. It starts from an assumption that systems are not built and were never built for everybody. It goes on to question the assumptions about who belongs and who does not in schools, and why those assumptions have held true for so long. And education systems transformation through inclusive education doesn't wait for systems to be ready. There's a lot of talk that systems need a long time to get ready for inclusive education. The finances need to be in order, the policies need to be in order, et cetera, et cetera. The right number of children need to be in a classroom, right? These are all things that are readiness. Inclusive systems transformation through inclusive education doesn't wait for those things to happen. Now, both of these things are important, and both of them are critical to the work of moving a more inclusive agenda forward in the world. We're going to talk a little bit today, though, about the through transformation. And we're going to think about inclusive education not as a policy, not as an approach, but as a disruptor. As a disruptor to these systems that already exist, that never really wanted to involve everybody, that never really were designed to be for everybody, but were really designed for a smaller segment of the population. So again, we work on a couple of assumptions here. Present systems are exclusionary. I would love if there was evidence otherwise, but I don't think it exists worldwide. Present systems are not ready to be fully inclusive. If you think about all of the pieces that are needed for a full systems transformation for inclusive education, the systems are not yet there. So what happens? We try to take on an action orientation. And I'm going to take Tim's idea here, and instead of saying a stick, maybe think about a wooden spoon that begins to stir things up a little bit, right? And so a disruptor is really any action that can broaden opportunities for learners, any action that can happen today, right? Any action that inserts inclusive practices into otherwise exclusionary spaces, and any action that provides a model for systems transformation. One of my good colleagues, Amani Williams at Gettysburg College, talks about prefigurative actions. And I hadn't heard that word till he talked about it, so I'm going to share that with you and honor his words. And he says prefigurative actions are the small actions that are taken in a space that prepare you for the larger revolution tomorrow, right? So systems transformation is likely in the future. However, this inclusive education systems transformation through inclusive education itself, it takes prefigurative action. It takes action today for a broader systems transformation tomorrow. And this type of approach, it asks critical questions and thinks about opportunities for disruption. Again, who is education for? How is learning structured? Who is responsible for learners? I'm going to walk you through 3 small examples, but there are probably, each of you can name one of them in your own work, in your own lives, that align with some of these questions. So number 1, who are schools for? Those of you who are familiar with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities know that there were disabled persons organizations that lobbied for and pushed important language about education and learners with disabilities. In the comments that followed that articulated each of the sections of the convention, general comment 4 was about education, and it specifically framed inclusive education as a right, not as something nice to do, not as an aspiration, as a right. Here's a wooden spoon, right? Take it to exclusionary systems and say, now wait a minute, let's rethink about this as a right, not as a future aspiration, but as a today right. How is learning structured? I think we're already starting to see really good evidence of this happening in pockets. Ideas like universal design for learning or policy accessibility mandates are taking this idea of education, which has historically been framed as teachers banking knowledge into students and those students taking that human capital and going out in the world. Suddenly, people are starting to ask questions about, well, is that accessible? How does that impact the learners, the opportunity for diverse learners to both receive the education that the teacher is giving and to participate and to respond and to create knowledge themselves? So the whole idea of teaching and learning are starting to be disrupted through some of these inclusive practices that you all are quite familiar with. And then finally, who's responsible for learners? Again, the historic system of education usually puts most of the responsibility on a single teacher. As inclusion starts to come in and as people start to ask questions and as people start to rethink how schools are being formatted, suddenly families are part of the equation. Suddenly multidisciplinary teams who can support schools in different ways are part of the equation. Suddenly additional classroom staff wherever possible are part of the equation. And the learners themselves become more responsible for the situation of learning. Right? These are disruptions to what has happened. The system has not yet transformed. I wish I could say we're there. It has not yet. But the system, which has historically been exclusionary, is being pushed and needled in different directions. So you might ask, well, aren't these just good practices? Aren't these things that just, we should be doing anyway? And we have lots of documentation of, and I agree, in a certain sense they are, but then we're going to come back to that definition of inclusive education, that initial definition that I showed you some time ago. And the way we're trying to frame this idea of systems transformation through inclusive education is that inclusionary actions in exclusionary systems can be disruptive, but in a really good and positive way, right? At least everybody in this room thinks so, I hope, right? And because inclusive education is an ongoing process, going back to that Ainscow definition, it's an ongoing process. There's never a destination of inclusion. It's constant, it's iterative. And then education systems transformation then is not a one-time event that we're hoping on January 23rd, 2028, we can say, good, the system is transformed. But instead, it's ongoing. It's ongoing, and it's pushing, and it's constantly transforming rather than hoping that the systems will be transformed. That's the slight distinction between the two. And so I'm going to close with a final question that you can reflect upon, and I hope we can talk about at lunch and throughout the day. The first part of it is, can systems transformation allow for greater inclusion? I'm hoping if you're at this meeting today, you're going to say yes. Is that correct? Okay, good. And here's a new thought for today maybe about this idea of through inclusive education, must inclusion itself be the impetus to transform systems? So this is the practice that's going to disrupt what exists now. And again, from that critical mindset, it's not what it should be. And it's okay for us to say that together. That's it for me. Thanks, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we give another round of applause to Chris? At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Joe Bond from GPE to share key findings from their work on the inclusive education globally. Ladies and gentlemen, may we a round of applause for Joe? Welcome.
Wow, thank you very much. What an amazing morning. I'm just so inspired, and there's so much I could pick up on which is not on my notes. But one thing I thought about was I trained as a teacher. Chris and I were talking. We both started as teachers. And in my first teaching jobs, I had children with intellectual and physical disabilities in my classroom. And I learned a lot. Andy and Adam, 2 different classrooms, 2 different countries, but I remember them very much. But I had no training, to your point, and actually very little support from the school. in how I could make the types of adjustments I needed to make that a welcoming classroom for those children. I hope I did a good enough job, but it just really gave me that pause for reflection. And the other pause I had is I moved into international development work. I've been in this for a little longer than I like to admit. And when I started, we did not talk about this. We didn't. We really didn't. And I would probably say that quite possibly, apart from visiting the odd school in countries which catered for children with special needs, quite often segregated, it probably wasn't until the last 10 years that it's really started to be on my radar. So like Rebecca said at the beginning, I'm on a learning curve. It's something I feel very passionately about as well, but I'm learning on how we can do it. And we all come from different perspectives, and part of the challenge is how do we use the positions, the leadership roles, the tables that we sit at to bring something to this, but also to learn something to this. So that's more of a kind of a personal note. I was a bit worried when they said you're going to talk about in a section about research, but I'm actually really happy because I get to follow Chris and I can talk a little bit about research into practice, and particularly these words systems transformation and what are we seeing across our partner countries. I will talk about some positive news stories because we are seeing some good things happening, to Tim's point, but I will end with saying, obviously, so much more needs to be done. So, GPE, just to make sure you all know, with a Global Partnership for Education, we are both a partnership and a fund. And our mission is to mobilise partnerships and investments that transform education systems in lower income countries, leaving no one behind. And I just want to stress the partnership piece, the investment piece, the transforming education systems piece Chris was talking about, and the leaving no one behind piece. And since 2002, we've raised more than $11 billion for education. We've helped our partner countries, which are now close to 90, as Laura said yesterday, get 160 million more children in school and double girls' enrolment. And we've seen, obviously, increases across that portfolio in completion rates, enabling every girl and boy, but not quite every girl and boy, to unlock their full potential. And these achievements are very much part of GPE's kind of unique partnership approach. So donors, multilateral institutions, civil society, teachers' representatives, the private sector. And this is really important, and of course governments, partner countries themselves, to approach this through a sense of mutual accountability. So what sort of positive shifts are we seeing roughly? And then no. Is that better? So we're definitely seeing more policies and laws in place. About half of our partner countries have national disability laws, and more than 1/3 have inclusive education policies or are in the process of developing. I told you it's kind of not glass half full, it's kind of glass third full. We're seeing greater availability of data. This is so important, and it's something I've actually seen really improve, quite frankly, in the last 5 years. So there's an increasing awareness of the need to collect data on children with disabilities, thus making these learners more visible. Disaggregation of data of children with disabilities is something we expect our partner countries to do and to make progress towards, and it's a question we ask right up front. I can give you a practical example. I was in Zanzibar in December, lucky me, and Zanzibar's revised its policies on disability. It's set up a National Council for People with Disabilities, a Department of Disability Affairs, to ensure that the rights and needs of people with disabilities are considered in government plans, strategies and programmes. Alongside that, awareness-raising activities have helped shift attitudes of parents, teachers and the community towards inclusive education. We've helped train hundreds of teachers on guidance and counselling, on the identification of special needs, classroom management skills for inclusion. Children have received glasses, hearing aids, and inclusive learning and teaching materials have been distributed to schools. And today, 28% of Zanzibar's schools offer inclusive education. So it's a start. Another example is Mongolia, where we're working with civil society and an organisation called All for Education Coalition, which is supported by us. And they're successfully advocating for increased access to quality education for children with disabilities. Their efforts, which include data gathering and advocacy, led the government to approve a resolution in 2022 boosting the education budget and incentivising the inclusion of children with disabilities in school. And actually, of 2021, over 80% of the children, they estimate, with disabilities are attending school in Mongolia, which is significant. It's almost a doubling from 2010. So that's a good piece. And for our own funding as well, we only started counting this through our grants in 2020 with the new strategy. So this is a learning process. But since that time, we've invested more than 141 million in activities that support children with disabilities across 97 different grants. But let me turn to the inclusive education systems piece and what all that means. Chris talked a little bit about some of what do we mean by systems. I really liked that slide. A lot of the work that we do in GPE is based on some of the systems thinking literature, but I was given feedback that a lot of this literature is really inaccessible. And so we actually need to talk about it a bit better. So I'm going to try and find ways to not be too clever about all of this, and you can give me feedback. But let me start with just a little fact that somebody said to me just recently. There's some new data coming out, I think, from the World Bank that's going to suggest that, the incidence of dyslexia, as an example, is between 5 and 20% in any given context. If you design a policy, a program for the average non-dyslexic child, you're automatically excluding 20% of the children that you intend to reach by design, right at that very point. But if the policy or program is designed with those children at the centre, you have a chance of not only meeting the needs of those children, but actually setting the stage for a more inclusive society, which is speaking to Tim's point around that's where it's going to happen. And it's not just about getting better for this group of children, it's actually getting better for society. So how do we work on all of this system stuff? Well, our starting point, now I'm acknowledging Chris, is to acknowledge that managing change in a system, in a complex system like education, is not straightforward. Systems are made of people, of institutions, of different incentives, information, resources, accountabilities, and all of these things pull in different directions. And it's actually that misalignment, again, Chris, you talked about this, that acts as a brake on doing anything different. It kind of really supports the inertia that we sometimes see when we've got political will to drive change, but not necessarily the alignment of all those different actors happening. So when we engage with a partner country, we try to break that down a little bit, and we're still learning. So the first question we ask is, well, what's the change you want to make? Because education systems are huge, and you can't do everything all at once, even though they have many priorities. So what's the change that you would like to make? What's your priority reform? And many talk about revolutionising teaching or improving foundational learning. So, important things here. Okay, good start. What's standing in the way? What are the actual delivery bottlenecks? And those delivery bottlenecks are right down at the level of this is what's happening to this person. It's the experience as well as the evidence that's standing in the way along that chain. It can be data, it's going to be finance, it's going to be transport, it's going to be attitudes. There's going to be a whole range of different bottlenecks that are getting in the way of that change. There's also a bigger piece with this, which is, well, what are those things that are going to sustain any change? Because a system needs sustaining. You don't just do a laser-like focus on something and then walk away. It needs to be sustained. And that is going to be around the data systems that are available. Does everybody have the data and evidence they need? Are they able to make changes as a result of that? It's going to be the planning processes. Is it gender responsive? Is it thinking about everybody? It's going to be the coordination and inclusive dialogue. And by that, I mean, are the stakeholders having an opportunity to talk to each other? Are the voices at the table Are people coordinated or going off in different directions, including external partners? And it's going to be financing. And with financing, you know, for a long time we've advocated for increased money to education. We will continue to do so, of domestic financing. But increasingly, the conversation we're having with our partner countries is, where is that financing going? And is it being spent efficiently? So that's a really important part, the equity and efficiency of financing. And then the next piece is how are all the stakeholders within the system, externally, outside, are going to align behind whatever reform it is that the government wants to put forward and play their part. You know, there can be brilliant technical solutions out there. There can be private sector. There can be civil society groups. How is everybody actually playing their part? Not fragmenting, but playing their part. And finally, how do we know that progress is being made behind that change that's intended? So concretely, what does that mean for thinking about inclusion? Well, the first question, again, there are always a series of questions, but you also have a lot of whys behind this. How will the priority reform, whatever it is, have a positive impact on the most marginalised? This is a question we ask routinely across everything we do. We specifically ask about the disaggregation of data, by gender, of course, but also by disability, for every country and every grant. We ask, what are the bottlenecks for those specific groups of children? That comes to the point I was making. If we don't understand what the barriers are to different groups of children, we will not design. Governments will not design appropriately. Grant agents, implementers will not design appropriately. We will support the strengthening of data systems and the building of financial incentives around equitable financing. So we have a whole results-based financing approach, and quite often we're asking governments questions like, how are you deploying your teachers? Because if you're deploying your teachers, if you're training your teachers well and deploying them to the most rural areas, you're likely to making a positive difference. And we expect everybody that has any funding from us, our grant agents, we call them, to report on how financing is supporting children with disabilities, and that's something we've been doing for a little while. Going back to the good practices exist. In Vietnam, we're supporting a mother tongue bilingual education approach. This is focused on foundational literacy, but it includes focus on ethnic minorities, including developing learning materials relevant for children with disabilities and training teachers on how to use those materials. In Kenya, Uganda and Zimbabwe, there is a collaborative model, the Inclusive Home-Based Early Learning Project, which involves communities, parents and governments to establish home-based learning centres, which partly in part facilitate children's holistic development, but also integrate them then into government and education systems. And in Uganda, through some of our research investments, KICS, we've been working on decentralised education management information systems that empower districts to collect, validate and utilise data for planning and resource allocation. And a particular result from that is that in Gulu district, the district actually used that data to advocate for additional resources for rehabilitating primary schools to better accommodate the needs of children with disabilities. So good practices exist. I'm pretty sure I'm near my time. No, not quite. Okay, I've got a couple more minutes then. I do really want to just end, as everybody else said, is we could all do more. I think very few countries are getting this right yet. And with the prospect of decreasing resources for education, and Yasmin's point very well taken, you know, there's a financing gap on the horizon. It's already there, but it's getting bigger. For all the reasons we know, you know, we do need to move from talking about the last mile, which was your sort of bringing people in piece, to flip that narrative so that systems are putting the most marginalised, and there are often multiple disadvantages at the centre. So what do I want us all to do? I think we need to improve our collective knowledge. What do we mean by inclusive education systems, not just at a conceptual level, but also with all those different parts that make up a system. So what does it mean in teacher training? What does it mean in materials? What does it mean in communities and attitudes? I have to say, I think UNICEF has done some very good work on these different pieces, including looking at how you might monitor these things. We need to grow the evidence base on what works in any given context. So that interplay between global knowledge and local contextual knowledge. We need to continue to really push on the data piece. We're partly there, we're not fully there yet. It's not only about getting children to school, but really thinking about which children and making sure that data is at all the right levels. I won't go on about the finance piece because that's super, super important. But my last point is really, all of you, and if you don't have the expertise, let's learn together and bring people who do. Let's bring expertise to the table. So if you have connections at country level that have this expertise, are they engaged in local education groups? Are they having these conversations and bringing the expertise to the table, including, and because we do finance this in some countries, people with disabilities at the table having these conversations? That's super, super important. We are way off getting that. So bring the expertise to the table. But if you're talking to publishers and networkers and all of these other, and tech companies and all the other places, what are they doing to put this front and centre? Teaching and learning materials can be made more accessible. Technology can open up the world differently with assistive devices. But also, are we talking about this and challenging us in our families, in our workplaces, in our sports teams? Because I think we all need to play a part, really, in both accepting and benefiting that working with differences is part of the society that, as Tim says, we want to build. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we give another round of applause to our... Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for those who have been joining us virtually. The live stream will continue at 3:30. And thank you, Brookings, for this wonderful, amazing event. For those of you in person with us, we'll be having a brief coffee break and then continuing into workshops. Workshop will begin promptly at 11, so please head to your workshop room around 10:50 a.m. Once again, thank you.